So it's my delight to be here with you today. I want to talk a little bit about why I'm even talking about this. So I do a lot of work with differentiation and scaffolding across the US and elsewhere. And the instructors that I work with, we talk about Carol Tomlinson's model of content, process, and product with the idea of helping the onerous task, and it can be, of working in a multi-level setting become more routinized and easier to deal with. And so what I started to think about was how could this concept of content, process, and product promote the authentic development of digital skills, digital literacy, digital resilience, so that was fun to say, alongside language and literacy development. Because what I noticed at the beginning with the pandemic, I was helping teachers transfer what they already knew how to do in person to virtual. It was just, look, it's not hard. This is how you make that happen. So it's really in-person environment to virtual environment, but really no novelty focus. And then as we exited, although I had COVID last week, as we exited the pandemic, we started thinking about how we could transform the classroom. I mean, the draw project, the wonderful things from crowded learning about transforming our instruction with EdTech routines. But what I kept running up against was teachers saying, I don't have time to do this as an add-on. And I kept trying to think, well, how can I help us all think about this not as an add-on, but as a fusion? So that's where I am coming from with this fusing of instruction with all the literacies. And I think it's just good to take a moment and reflect, when I ask teachers, think what you're teaching when you're saying, what do effective listeners, speakers, readers, and writers do? And then what are the foundational skills that allow them to do it? And by the same token, what do effective users of technology do? And what foundational skills allow them to do that? And thinking about how those intersect. The other thing I like to point out is that a lot of times we talk about skill, but very often it's strategies that bring the skill into a more effective stance. So the strategies that we apply can very often cross over the different literacies. So how can we fuse our instruction with digital skills, literacy, and resilience? And I could ask you all to put that in the chat right now, but it's Friday. So I'm going to tell you that we're going to do it with content, we're going to do it with process, I'm going to do it with product. Fusing the content is probably not rocket science for any of us, right? Fusing the content is about using materials on topics related to digital skills, digital literacy, and digital resilience. So you have students listen to, when they're doing their focus listening work, we don't do a lot of this, but it's so important. We teach listening, use content that relates to a digital skill or digital literacy, talk about it. So if I have a lesson where learners are going to be discussing sleep, the importance of sleep and health, and then I decide I'm going to bring this question in about what's good, bad, or interesting about looking at your phone before you go to bed. So we can bring in these concepts into the content. Or Pace AI is a brilliant tool for this. I found this article on how AI is shaping the future of education. I found it on Forbes. It was a level 7, it was off the charts. I was able to put it in here and bring it down to NRS 3. I could also, they might tell me I can't bring it down low enough for NRS 1, but then I might just, ask chat to do a summary. But I can get learners using their reading strategies and working with all these different skills around content that is related to the literacy and resilience that I would love for them to be thinking about. And then, of course, with writing, I can do something as simple as a quick write, where I just have the students choose. I always like to give choice, have the students choose between one of these questions and write for 10 minutes on it. Now, you're saying, oh, that's very good and well, Jamie, for the student who could write on this, but what about the low-level student? How about having the student, no judgment, brainstorm all the pieces of technology in their home? So that's their writing, right? They're writing, I have a toaster. Maybe it's not a piece of technology, but we get that going. Now, when we fuse the process, so that's content, right? Where the content is the basis of what we're discussing. But when we fuse the process, that does depend a little bit on what the lesson is about. So with listening and reading, you can have students apply their digital skills to locate or access the sources of the listening and reading content. So that content and that listening may not be about technology or about digital issues. It might be about something entirely different, but they're going to use their digital skills to locate or access those sources. Or they're maybe going to use an EdTech tool to annotate or take notes. So I'm not saying that we have to do this all the way across the lesson. We maybe pull out one piece of the lesson to do it, but we're integrating it as part of the lesson. And then, of course, in listening and reading, we want students to be able to evaluate content credibility. And we also want them to be able to increase their access to whatever it is they're listening or reading. So I know all of you already know that the idea of slowing down a YouTube video or increasing the text size is something that we want learners to be able to do so that they in turn have increased accessibility. When I fuse the process for speaking, it's a little bit different, but you've already heard Jackie and Jen reference that PACE has a role play feature. It also has a pronunciation feature. And one of the things that is so spectacular about the pronunciation feature is that it's comprehensibility, not perfect pronunciation. And so Jen made a point, I think, or maybe Jackie did, of the fact that the tool recognizes what the learner's saying and often will recast it. So if you can use EdTech tools to access speaking feedback features, then you're fusing the process of how you're teaching with digital literacy as well and skills, as well as the listening skills. And then, of course, in speaking, I want my learners to be collaborating. And we know that collaboration is one of the key elements of digital literacy. So having learners collaborate on a Google Doc or on a slide, having them locate and curate content during problem and project-based learning is all about fusing that process. And then writing, I love writing. We tend not to do as much writing process in classes because it's so time consuming, but it's so important to do, and it's so relevant for learners if they can apply their digital skills, digital literacy, and digital resilience by using EdTech tools for pre-writing. Padlet Sandbox is a fabulous tool for that. They can go and find images or have AI develop images. And the AI will read their ideas. There are 17 different tools on Padlet Sandbox. So that's something that you kind of get a really large spectrum of tools available to students that you could teach one at a time. But then you can have the learners draft, give and respond to feedback, revise, edit, finalize, and publish digitally. And the idea of having something published, whether it's a blog, this is all what we knew in the analog days. When we did a newsletter, students were so happy to have their writing published. But now we can publish it digitally, and the formatting becomes much easier, for learners to do rather than the teacher. And the last, which crosses all the different skill areas, is fusing the products or proof of learning that our learners do. So having them be engaged with creating responses, having them be engaged with curating and presenting content from the web, having them use EdTech tools to respond to whatever the lesson content was. This is a way that we can really engage learners, having to teach the tools, but then it becomes routine when we give them this choice board that they can choose. Do you want to do a video? Do you want to do a slide deck? Do you want to use a Padlet? And they get those choices. So just putting it in the shape of a lesson, because I know that's all kind of in the ether. As I mentioned, I'm posing a question. In a speaking lesson, I will often pose a question. I might do it with a Menti poll. In this case, I'm going to do it as a round robin, and I'm going to ask the students what's good, not so great, and are interesting about looking at your phone before bed. They're going to round robin their responses. If I'm virtual, that's in a breakout room. But if I'm in person, they're in teams, like you see the AI has developed here, where there are two men that are pretty much the same, just one's older. and they're bearded. Then the teams will prepare a summary of their responses. That can be digital. And the teams rehearse and use presentation strategies to report. That also can be digital. What I want to have happen, though, is I want to lift up the role of IT in this process. So where I might have had, facilitator, timekeeper, graphic designer, I want to make sure that I have an IT role in the set of roles that I supply for the student. And this is often terrific from the standpoint of a learner. Our adults have many identities, and sometimes their identities get reduced down to English language learner or adult learner, when in fact they have all these other aspects. So someone who has these skills, it's a great opportunity for them to lift that up in the class. The other thing that I want to make sure I do within the lesson is that I highlight the speaking strategies and I highlight the digital skills that learners are applying. So I'm not going to do all these speaking strategies. These are all the strategies. But in that particular lesson that I just showed you, I'm going to be asking students to emphasize key points or information with intonation and stress, and I'm going to ask them to rehearse oral presentations. Those are two things that we're going to work on with this lesson. And skill-wise, because they're going to record their presentation, their summary, they're going to be able to use an app feature to record, and they're going to have to upload a file if they upload the file, the MP3 file, to our LMS or to my text. And then at the end, it's critical that we highlight the resilience that learners have gone through, not just in terms of the digital side of things, but also the language side of things. So we want to ask the learners, what did you have to work around? How did you solve problems as this came up? What did you do? And that brings it together as not succeeding is learning in this case. So giving students the opportunity to say, next time I need to do this, or I wish that I knew how to, and giving that language to students is also really valuable. And that's resilience. So a few last thoughts. I'm going to speak really slowly because I rushed through. My suggestion is to start with one element to fuse in the lesson. It's very tempting to look through a lesson and say, oh, I could do that there, I could do that there, I could do that there. But you want to make time for skill and strategy practice. Just because you can use a Menti for a poll and then have learners use their phones to record, each of those is going to require some amount of instruction until it is routine for the student. So pace yourself and respect your students' need for pacing. Just as I showed a while ago, be sure that you highlight, focus, call out the strategies and skills that are being applied across literacies. So how is this similar to what you do when you're reading a book? What are the tools that you're going to do to remember the content that you just heard? And then scaffold, scaffold, and scaffold some more.